in their thinking and closer to the truth of the Scriptures than the Pharisees or the Sadducees. We'll talk more about that in a moment. You see Cave 4 closely adjacent to the Qumran community. It wasn't excavated until the 50s. The discovery in 52 of Cave 4 revealed a host of fragments and a host of manuscripts. Our excavation area is in the flattened area, the uninhabited area, at the extended end of that peninsula that juts out. The restoration and excavation of the Qumran community, which took place mainly in the 50s, revealed that this was a group that had baptistries, cisterns, assembly halls. They very much reverenced the Word of God and were involved in copying scrolls of the Scriptures as well as other documents. They were very strict in their religious ceremony. They had added a number of traditions, as we see was the case with the scribes and the Pharisees. But they reverenced the Scriptures, obviously. They believed in the coming Messiah. They believed the prophecies were being fulfilled, or ready to be fulfilled, and saw their role as, much like John the Baptist, to introduce the coming Messiah. When the Romans came, they decided to hide the scrolls in these jars in the caves. Here we see a restoration of that Qumran community. And you can see that it would house a number of people, somewhere between 200 and 300 people, lived there in isolation in the desert, much like monks, and they busied themselves with the copying of scrolls. One of the buildings was a 2-story building, which is called the Scriptorium. This is where scrolls were copied and stored. And especially there in the upper story, you see these long benches. We know what was going on because of the benches, where they laid out the scrolls and stitched the pages together to form the scroll. There are inkwells that are there, and that's where the scribes did their copying. But the remains of these benches in the upper story of this collapsed scriptorium tell us a lot about the activities that were involved there. The scroll jars were manufactured there at Qumran, though many of the jars came from Jerusalem, as we'll see. The Jews revolted against the Roman rule in 66 AD, and at that point they hid their manuscripts, their copied parchments, animal skins with the Scriptures written on it, as well as other documents, in the scroll jars in the caves that were near the settlement. In 68, the Romans came marching in and destroyed the Qumran settlement and rebuilt it and turned it into a Roman garrison. And so it was unoccupied by the Qumran community after 68 AD. That ended that. It had continued for perhaps 300 years, or almost 300 years. But it is in this section, in this area, that we find the various caves. Cave 4 is directly across from the community. Cave 2, 1, 3, and 11 are about a half mile to the north, as we see here. Qumran is back in this direction. But we were able, while we were there, to visit these caves, to go into the caves and to see them. And the fellow climbing up the hill here in this picture that I took is one of the Bedouins who was there when the scrolls were originally discovered. And he carried us up to the caves and described the process to us. This is Cave 1 up here, where the first and some of the most important scrolls were found, including the Isaiah scroll that we have replicated here. Very interesting gentleman, now 82 years old, speaking in Arabic through a translator. His grandson that we see on the left has worked with Dr. Randall Price, who is director of the dig there at Qumran, for a number of years. He is the co-director of the dig, and it's his grandfather that actually helped find the scrolls. But it was extremely interesting to be able to get into the caves to see where they had actually been found. This is one of the scrolls that actually came from this Cave 1. In Cave 4, which is directly across from the community, 15,000 fragments were found. This was in 52. Archaeologists then excavated it and found another 40,000 fragments. Many objected and complained because they hadn't published their results after several years. When you're working with 40,000 fragments, a 40,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, without a box top to guide you, you have a real challenge. But working with computers made it much easier, and that, of course, has all been published at this point. These manuscripts included 400 complete, well, not complete, but the 40,000 fragments were from 400 manuscripts. 100 of them were biblical text. Inside Cave 4, we see Dr. Price showing where these scroll fragments were found and the jars that contain them. This is the remains of the Qumran community, and it's very interesting to go to see the. I wish we had more time to talk about it, and the baptismal pools, the assembly halls, and the various traditions that were unique to that community. But we want to get the setting as we are on the Qumran Plateau where we were excavating. We look directly across the Dead Sea to Jordan, and up on the top of the hill is Mount Nebo. That's where several of us were year before last, and plan to be again this summer. Of course, together with Qumran, at Qumran, and a number of the other places there. But it is at this site that we find the Qumran community, and our dig took place out on the extension of the plateau. I counted it a great honor to be a part of such an excavation. Dr. Randall Price is a devout Bible believer from Texas, and he's one of the few devout Bible believers who has been able to negotiate the maze of complexity and opposition to conservatives through the Department of Antiquities to actually get an official permit. And did, and this is his second one. He is applying for 2 more at the present, and has asked me to be a part of those. But we were able to do an official dig under the Department of Antiquities with their blessing, actually begrudgingly, but they did. And we see in the background the Dead Sea. We see the trenches that we were able to dig. And just to give you an idea of the kind of work that's going on, we notice the Bedouins here who are working hard, tossing the buckets to a young fellow here from Dallas. He's at Criswell College trying to finish his degree, and they're working them out pretty good. Now, we didn't work that hard the whole time, but at this point, they're kind of showing off for the camera, I think. Dr. Randall Price is seen here, director of the excavations, keeping things in line and directing the efforts. We can see the Dead Sea Scroll off to the left, and this trench that you see beginning in the foreground eventually wound up being about 7 feet deep and met the trench that you see there in the background. You see Dr. Price over on the right and the caves back in the background. Joseph Omara was the grandson that we were able to work with. He was co-director of the dig, and I considered it an honor to be able to work with him. He's a hard worker and very diligent and very conscientious. Here we see he, together with his grandfather, standing there at the dig site looking up to where the grandfather had found some of the caves.